Okay, good afternoon, everybody, and thank you very much for coming along to today's seminar. Phones to silent, and please be careful of the desk attachment on your chair. Today, our seminar speaker is Diego Marino-Fages, who's an assistant professor in the economics department of the Business School, Durham University. I'm delighted to say that Diego is here under the auspices of the Geary BICS scheme, and his host is Margaret Samahita in the School of Economics. So Diego's research uses experimental and observational data to study culture, social preferences and social norms. His current research relies on survey data to study how migrants assimilate culturally towards the locals, and he also uses experimental methods to study how group sizes affect cooperation in public good games. So in more recent projects, Diego has been studying how the results of presidential elections can affect the prevailing social norms in the country using data from Twitter. And arising from that research today, Diego is going to present a seminar on motivated forecasts, evidence from the presidential elections in Argentina.
Well, thank you everyone for having me, especially Margaret. I'm very happy to be here, and also thank you because it's a really big week to be here, so really appreciate that. So I'm going to present this paper. It's an experiment that I ran just before the elections in Argentina. So yeah, well, let's jump into it. So we know that people often disagree on factual questions, right? And basically they are inaccurate in ways that we can predict, right? Like they are going to, people make mistakes in ways that we can predict based on their political stance, for example, right? Like, so if we think of a case in the US, if people are Democrats, they are more likely to make mistakes that basically favor the Democrat Party. Right? The same happens with, usually there are papers looking, or in psychology, for example, looking at how people make mistakes to favor their football club, for example, or stuff like that. So just to have kind of a definition, because there are many definitions of what motivated beliefs are. This one is from Zimmer from 2020, and it says it is those beliefs that are not exclusively guided by a desire of accuracy, right? So ask the question, then you respond, but on top of trying to respond with the truth, you kind of sneak in some of your views in some way. Okay, so there are many examples of this in political science. I'm going to, since we have time here, I'm going to talk about a few examples, but there's not so much yet in economics. Now this literature is growing, but this is mainly coming from political science. So one classic experiment in this literature is to get a bunch of people in the US, for example, that are Democrats, Republicans, and then you ask them how is the economy doing, right? So if the president is Democrat, then the Democrats will say economy is doing great. If you ask a Republican, they will say the opposite, right? There are many papers like this using different kinds of indicators of the economic performance of the country. There are other papers, again, like most of this is in political science. Some of them are looking at political topics, right? Like, for example, they ask questions about migration or climate change and stuff like that. So as you might imagine, Republicans say there is no such a thing as climate change, migration is a really big problem, and things like this. Okay, and even when the information is there, I mean, they can Google, they can inform themselves. Still, after knowing this, they still make mistakes in their own direction. So how they interpret the information is different. There are other papers that make it even more less important, right? Like questions about Obama's religion. So Democrats are more likely to think that Obama has no religion, maybe, and Republicans are more tend to think that Obama is Muslim, for example. right? Then there are other papers even looking at something that is very obvious, like, they show pictures to people of the inaugural campaigns, and they say how many people are there. So if this is the inaugural campaign of Obama and you are with them, you are more likely to say that the number is large, right? So there are many examples like this. One of them that is probably the closest to my paper is this one by Raja et al., where basically they provide people with different headlines from newspapers, and some of them are fake and some are not, right? And so they ask people, like, is this fake news or not? And then they are more likely to report that the news are fake if they basically don't align with the views. Okay. What they find, that I will be coming back to this, is that basically people tend to change their answers about the opposing party. So basically, what they are showing there is that these motivated beliefs are coming from what they think about the other party, not so much from their own party. And these other papers are more from economics. As you can see, they are like very recent papers. They are all 2024. So this literature is only starting in economics. So, for example, this one is a purely experimental abstract paper where basically they play games where they have to add some numbers, and in one treatment they need to add a number that is 0. And so it's a very easy mathematical task, and they tend to make mistakes when this error fails. Right? And then these are two papers that actually try to study the belief formation, like over time. So basically, they get an input and they see whether people change the priors or not in light of new information. This one is a working paper, and basically, I think my paper is also close to this one in the sense of complementing it. We find slightly different results. In fact, quite different results for the part of updating the beliefs, but they have like a more complete theoretical framework of like going all the way from the prior to the updating. Okay. So also part of the motivation is that the expectation of economic agents is one of the most important inputs that policymakers need, right? Especially if you think about central bankers. They need to know what people think the inflation is going to be, for example. Especially in countries like Argentina, where inflation is really high. Right? I will show you how we were doing in terms of inflation at this time. So these expectations are usually, in more normal countries, you take a survey of some people that hopefully it's representative of the population, and then you take an average, and this is basically the forecast that you. But this can lead to wrong policies if they are biased, right? Imagine if you only survey a certain neighborhood in the city of Dublin, will probably be quite different from what the rest of the country thinks, right? So it's kind of, the idea comes a bit from here. So the question I'm asking in this paper is whether people's forecast about important economic indicators, why do I say important? Is because, other papers were asking about, Obama's religion. It's not really like something that we care about, or the normal citizen would care about. So how this forecast are affected by the political purpose? This is what I want to look at. So also other reasons for why it would be interesting to know about this forecast is that if people have different beliefs, let's say about inflation, so many transactions might be prevented because people don't really agree on what should be the inflation of adjustment. Let's say you want to take a loan or something. Also, if you have different views about unemployment, for example, then let's say you think unemployment is going to be really high, then when you go and search for a job, probably you will value more the security of the job as opposed to the opportunities to grow in that particular position, right? So really knowing these beliefs is really important. Okay, so what is the context? So the elections, the last elections in Argentina, probably since the topics you are interested, probably you've heard about this, took place in October 22nd. This was a period of very high uncertainty, right, with respect to many economic variables. And at the time we had three main candidates, and of those three, two were the most extreme ones, which were Milei, who is now our president, and Massa. And they were having like these really, really opposed views. To have an example, Milei wanted to blow up, he literally said that, he wanted to blow up the central bank, because he was saying that, you know, the inflation was coming from just like an irresponsible printing of money at the time. But who was responsible of this printing was the other candidate, Massa, at the time, right? So he was the current Minister of Economy at the time. So he was running when he was running for the elections. So in Argentina we have these PASO elections, which are like open primary elections, where basically we select the candidates for each party that will then run in the elections. And at that point, the three main candidates were very close. And at this point, we were not really sure who was going to win the elections, which is something important in the design of the experiment. So the context in Argentina at the time was something like this. So this, here you can see the monthly inflation. So you can see that in October, November, and December, the inflation went up to like more than 20% monthly. So this means that within the day, prices were changing. So another bit of context, in Argentina, we take the price of the dollar or the exchange rate as like a temperature of how the economy is doing, right? When the price of the dollar, exchange rate is going up, we think we are doing bad, right? And usually before the elections, we get all these memes of what is going to happen with the dollar. And here you can see a few examples. This was the president right before the elections. So more about context. This was our president. What he also wanted to do is cut the government expenditures, but really strong. Okay, so that's why we had the change. That was actually part of the campaign. Okay, so what do I do in the experiment? I took students and alumni from one of the largest universities. This is a public and free university, which is important because it speaks about the sample, right? This is not, you shouldn't take this as a sample of students. It's more general than that. It's quite representative, because the fact that it is free, it means that many people, when they just finish high school, they sign up. Maybe they don't show up ever, or maybe they go for a week or so, but so it's quite general. Well, the paper was, the analysis was pre-registered in aspredictive.org. Okay, and this was an online survey, so I sent, through the university, I got all the contacts from these people, and I sent emails during the week before the election and after the second public debate that we had between the presidents. Okay. So, what do? We asked participants for the levels of inflation, unemployment, and the two exchange rates. So another side note here, in Argentina at the moment there are so many exchange rates. Like there is one that is the official one that not many people have access to. I mean, you have to fulfill like many requisites to be able to access it, which is the cheapest one. Then there is another one if you want to import things, another one if you want to export things, another one if you want to travel abroad, another one. At some point there was one for going to a Coldplay concert in Argentina. So there are so many. And then there is one, that is the one that we call blue. That is the black market one, the one that you can just go and buy it on the streets for sale. Okay. So, but the most important ones, the ones that people, the most important one is the blue one, the black market. That's the one that everyone has in their minds and know, like, look in the newspapers every day to see how it's doing. You will see in a minute that people don't really know that well the official one because they don't have access to it. So after I asked these things about the current values at the time, this week before the elections, I asked again for forecast about the same variables, but conditional on each president winning the elections. Right? So I asked them, like, what will be the the inflation if Massa wins elections? What will be the inflation if Milei wins the elections? So now I'm just explaining the survey, right? So first current levels, then I'm going to ask this conditional on which candidate wins, and then there are some questions about who they think they will win, who they're going to vote for, who they want to win, and some measure of literacy, right? So basically, if they can do math, if they know the role of the central bank, if they know who gets affected by inflation most, or how inflation is determined, stuff like that. Okay, so the experimental design, here I come with the trick. So for participation, every participant would get a lottery ticket for $100 in cash. This was on purpose to make it more salient, because the dollar is like the big thing. And we have 30 prizes. Okay, so this is a 2x2 factorial design, and the main treatment here is the incentives for accuracy. So I will have a group where they have no incentives. I just ask these questions, and then there is another group for which I give them extra lottery tickets if they are accurate. So basically, they were all paid, and the lottery was conducted 6 months later. Right? So then I saw. And basically, if they were within 5% of the actual number of inflation or price of the dollar, etc., then they would get extra lottery tickets. So the only difference was like these extra incentives to be accurate. The other treatment is I give them correct information about the current values. So after they responded what they thought it was the current value of the unemployment, for example, I tell them, look, the actual one is this one. And then they come to the forecasts. Okay, I did this because I was worried that maybe they were completely off, and I wanted to kind of have everyone starting from the same place. Okay, so what is the idea here? So when people answer these questions, then they have these two motives, right? Like this accuracy motive and the directional motive, which is basically supporting your candidate or your party. Right? So the idea is when you have these extra incentives, you are shifting the weight that you put from one motive to the other one, right? From the directional to more to the accuracy motive, right? And this is basically the trick to try to answer this. Okay, so more about experimental design. So this is basically all the branches. So first, they respond about the current values. And then they either get no feedback or feedback about those current values. And then they do unincentivized or incentivized forecasts. And then I switched and I asked in some placebos like other questions where they would get the incentives. So I wanted to be fair, like everyone would have the same chances to win the lottery, right? To get extra lottery tickets. What I claim here is that there is a methodological contribution. First of all, because of this forecast are almost impossible to cheat. Like in other places, you can probably Google, and see the forecast, but in this case, it's like all over the place. So basically, you can believe whatever you want. So the fact that it's also in the future allows for this conditionalization of the same variable. So I don't have these problems of previous literature where they ask, for example, like a list of questions, and then they take like an index or something. So here I have the exact same question, like inflation, unemployment, etc. These topics are relevant to all subjects. They all care about inflation. Inflation should go in the same direction for their own benefit. Unemployment the same, and the price of the dollar as well. So the questions have an easy interpretation. They all know about these variables, and they are also continuous variables, which make it easier to analyze. And then the other thing that I'm not really using it in this case, but this could be applied in other contexts, is that the gap that I will be looking at, we shouldn't need to know the political link. In this case, we do need, because there are some people switching that maybe, they actually know that the other candidate, the candidate that they like will have a higher inflation, but they still prefer because of some other reason, like other policies, right? But in some cases where it is clear and there is no switching, then you don't really know, you don't really need to know their political link. This is important because in some questionnaires, especially like the US, for example, sometimes you are not allowed to ask for race or country of origin or things like this. So it is quite useful to just look at the gap. If you can get the gap for each person, then you are fine. You don't need to know in which direction they go. Okay, so let me show you about the demographics. We have a little bit more of females. Age is on average 26 years old. So this also shows that they are not really only students. There are people who graduated or who never went to uni as well. Roughly 60% of them are working, either full-time or part-time. And they are a bit more on the right wing of the spectrum. Okay. I mean, it's balanced in general in both control and treatment. These are the literacy scores. Basically, there were 3 questions for each of these, as I explained earlier. So this was the monetary literacy score, this about the central bank and so on. Financial literacy score, like where they get like some options and we see how they would like to invest, for example, to see whether they can if they have financial literacy, and some pure literacy, which is like just math, where they can compute compound interest and things like this. Okay, so here you can see that there is a large variation in the literacy score. These are the responses to the current values. So these were the 4 questions that we had. So in red you have the control group, in blue you have the treatment. This is split by literacy score. And I don't know if you can see, but there is one black dashed line, and that one is the real value at the time. So as you can see, the official dollar, there was a gap there, but for the blue dollar, which is the black market one, they are right on spot, right? Like people basically read the newspapers just to know that. So this is just a teaser. This is what they were doing in previous papers, right? Like basically, they ask for these questions and then they run it on a dummy whether they support the candidate or not, right? At this point, Massa was in power. So basically, you see there are all negative signs, meaning that they are reporting lower values. I mean, for all these indicators, lower values are better, right? So if you support Massa, they are kind of reporting lower values although there are not many significant effects, but they are all going in the same direction. So yes, you're right. So my question is then, what happens with the forecast gaps when we give incentives for accuracy? So this is what I want to answer. So what are these forecast gaps? So I define it this way. This is just an example, right, for inflation. So if you are a Massa supporter, then I do the forecast that you do for Milei minus the forecast you do for Massa, right? But if you are a Milei supporter, I do the opposite. Okay? So this is what I'm saying, that if in other settings maybe you don't need to ask, maybe you don't care in which kind of supporter you are, but in this case, because they are switching, I need to basically change the order. Okay. So, and then after computing these gaps, I just run this basic regression, right? Like those gaps on a dummy, whether they get or not the incentives. So, I didn't want to put the full table here because then you will be able to see. So that's why we don't have the averages here. So we can see that overall, that like almost all of them are negative, right? And mostly the effect comes from dollar blue, right? And these are really large effects. So this is what we don't have here, the averages. But I can tell you that this goes to like 20, 50% even, right, of the gap. So if you think of those gaps, this is like, especially this one, I think it's like reducing the gap by 20 something percent. Okay, so it's a massive reduction. So and they have different ways. So basically, this is just comparing Millet and Massa, which were the most extremes. Massa and Bullrich, and so Massa and Bullrich is where we have some. Where was? So there was some positive. Okay, no, there are no positives here. But this is where these two candidates were a bit more closer than the others. So this is the maximum difference. Basically, the candidate for which you set the highest inflation and the candidate for which you set the lowest inflation. These are just pairs, and this is the least and most favored candidate. Right? So no matter how you compare these things, you get those negative effects. So now what happens with the forecast gaps when we provide the current information, when we give them feedback? In that case, I mean, there are some negative signs, but there's no clear pattern, and the effects are much smaller. Okay, so now what we can do is separate, because this is a 2x2 design. So if we look at the incentives for accuracy when there is no information, then we see the effects are stronger. Right? This is people who didn't have feedback, and so this means that actually information is playing a role. Right? So if you look at the other one, with information, the effects get smaller. Right? So part of it is because they don't know, and they use probably heuristics, and they say, okay, I don't know this, but probably my candidate is doing better. Right? And about the information, when there is no accuracy treatment and when there is the accuracy treatment. So in this case, information, like as you see, so especially for unemployment here, you have more significant results. And this is because it's not turned off basically by the incentive for accuracy. I can show you also that the incentive for accuracy, basically people spend more time in answering these questions, like on average 30 seconds more than in the control group. So they were putting some effort and like trying to, maybe they Googled. Unfortunately, I don't know whether they were Googling nor like what kind of sources they were Googling. And this is what is kind of in contrast to what this working paper by Yan Chen et al. Is looking. That basically what they find is that people tend to go and search for information that aligns with their pride. Right? So here, if anything, I'm finding the opposite, because they are updating in the other direction. So, okay, so, but what I was expecting is for this information, providing them feedback, what I was expecting is that the variance should have been reduced, right? Because now they know better, so they can make better predictions. So for overall, we see a bit of a reduction for the official dollar and the dollar blue. But again, if we separate these results by whether they got the accuracy or not, we find a different result. With no, when there is no accuracy treatment, when there are no incentives, then this feedback works, right? Like in most cases, I mean, we have negative and stronger for this thing. But when there is accuracy, we don't see much. Right? So basically, when there is money, then the feedback doesn't matter. Right? Because they put some effort, maybe they Google, and they find the information. So both treatments would happen. So here you can see, again, like the more time they spend, the better the response is, and also the confidence they have in their response. I only asked this for the price of the dollar, because then it was already like a long survey, so this was only one question. This is what I said before, that on average they spend 31 more seconds in the treatment. And then let me show you quickly the placebos, which didn't work, some didn't work so well. So I asked them for the price of Merval, which is the stock market, the index in Argentina, and the price of the Bitcoin. But these are the changes from one day to another. So it should be kind of impossible to predict those. So I was expecting to get the zero there. Those are fine. We got the zeros. I asked them also for the temperature on a specific day, 6 months later, and there we find an effect. The issue here is that these questions were not conditional on the candidate winning, right? So the reason I didn't want to do it in this exact same way was that it doesn't really make much sense to ask them what do you think is going to be the temperature in 6 months if Massa wins or if Milei wins. So I didn't do that. So basically, if you take the difference between the two groups, then it is 0. But the way you can rationalize that is also this region is very hot. So when there is no money on the table, then they just say like a very high number. And so on average, the responses were 32 degrees for the control group, and with the treatment where they actually make money, if they are accurate, it was 31, say 30 point something. Okay, so it's still close. So temperature, if you think it like in this way, it didn't work. That's the reason exposed I came up with. And again, with the football. So I asked them, what is your football team? And which is the team that we have the highest points in the league next year and the lowest, right? And I was expecting to find something strong here, but actually it's a 0. And one reason that could be is that it's very clear what are the best teams. So you get like a cognitive dissonance of like saying your team is going to be the highest. So, but yeah, it didn't work in that way. Also, this one is not, by condition. So I think this is what probably I can use to answer your question. I think a bit more. So this is one example where I'm showing only for Massa supporters what they answer for the official dollar. Let's look at the blue dollar, which is the clearest, in the control and in the treatment. Okay, so what do we expect here? And this happens overall. Like one of the conclusions here is that in the control and in the treatment, they report higher values for Milei, right? That is clear. In general, the highest bars would be for the candidate that they don't like, right? But then with the treatment, now what they are saying here, they are doing here is they are basically accepting that Milei is not going to be that bad for the president, right? Basically, that's what I'm saying. Okay, so 5 minutes. So now let me just show you the heterogeneity. So basically, we can see that overall the pattern stays if we split this by low. I mean, now I'm splitting everything at the median to have root out. So if we split by literacy score, we find kind of the same results with the treatment. If we split it by the accuracy regarding the current values, probably this can answer a bit of the questions, not about how much they care about politics, but about how much they know about the current situation. So again, in general, it goes in the same direction. By the time taken to respond, again, so there is not much heterogeneity. Like, however I split the sample, we can see similar results. And also by political leaning. And I can conclude now, I think. So basically in the paper, I'm trying to provide evidence on motivated forecasts. And basically these disagreements are reduced when there are incentives to respond to these questions accurately. So the effect is present across the board, different candidates, different economic indicators, literacy levels, knowledge about the economy, the effort they put on the political orientation. The results are in line with Radje. This is the paper I mentioned about the fake news. That basically they are reacting about the news about the opposing candidate. And this is what I was saying here. So I probably didn't mention, but see how for Massa supporters, they don't change much on this, but they are actually updating a lot on the opposing candidates. So this is in line with that paper by Radje. And I found no effect of providing subjects with information just by itself, right? So, but the variance in the responses does get reduced. So, yeah, that was it for me. Thank you very much.